Not infrequently, people who seek help from our clinic present as their main struggle that they find themselves becoming irritable, angry, and they find themselves often in arguments. And often people say, this is really out of character for me. And they don't like it when they react in that sort of way. I think it is important at the beginning of the conversation, like in many of our conversations, to separate out what is our, as I say, human condition, opposed to what might be something that in a way requires medical treatment, if you see what I mean. The distinction between, this is what makes us human, opposed to, has my level of stress and distress developed in a way that I might have developed, let's say, an episode of depression or an episode of a particular anxiety disorder. So that's important that we acknowledge what there is, and because it is just a common feeling, a common emotion. It's part of our emotional repertoire to feel angry. And it will have its place, otherwise we wouldn't have that. I suppose if one believes in that, it's an evolutionary advantage to at times show anger, because it sends a signal to the other person, until here but no further. It's how we communicate. Anger is maybe the irritability, the arguments, the angry expressions we might choose and perhaps later regret. It is not infrequently a sign of an underlying episode of depression. It's one of the diagnostic criteria that there is more irritability, often, as I said, out of character for the person. It is a sign of anxiety, because anger, anxiety, they are both part of when our fight or flight reaction is activated. So we perceive something as a threat and we react in that way. Our body gets ready, which is unpleasant, but a normal physiological reaction. And if there is no escape route, I might show anger. Often people withdraw. It's probably clever sometimes to run away. But anger, in other words, some people say, is not a primary emotion. Underlying our anger, there is usually what really matters. And often it is actually anxiety. Often it is low mood, hopelessness and helplessness. It just comes out in that way. And of course, it is often beyond a certain point of a signal to the other person, leave me alone. When it goes beyond that, it's not helpful. It leads to extra burden of, the relationships get disrupted. People might withdraw from us and therefore we lose support. And we probably don't like to be that way. We might afterwards feel guilty about it, self-conscious about it, and very self-critical about it. So I think it's good that people come forward rather than hiding it away and feeling too ashamed of it and ask us for help when it comes to anger. It's, unless in conjunction with, let's say, depression or anxiety, for which we might recommend medication treatment. So it's just an expression of an underlying issue. Often it is a psychological theme. It's part of what gets activated. And it's really helpful to seek some psychology and therapy sessions for that. Maybe in combination, depending on what exactly the scenario is, we can work out together in the first few sessions and formulate that. From a psychological point of view, if I want to change something, that probably applies, maybe it's even the definition of change. In the first instance, I need to understand my own reactivity and reactions. We spent most of our time in autopilot. Otherwise, we couldn't maneuver a complex world. And when activated, the program runs its show. So the first step, if I want to change something, always is that I need to recognize, that I need to find words to describe what is going on for me. Then I can see that. And it's in the way I gesture, you hold it here, then you can observe it rather than inside, which makes it much more difficult. And once I have a good understanding of what my autopilot moment might be, then I can begin to observe it and learn more about it. And then I can begin to think, right, this is how maybe for good reasons, maybe embedded in my personal history, wherever that might come from, but I recognize the autopilot, I recognize my reaction. I'm no longer happy with that because it doesn't quite work for me any longer. How would I instead like to be able to respond opposed to react? And I can use sessions to develop how I like to go on about similar situations that activate my anger. How can I approach them? And then it's a question of practicing something new. So in a way, it is recognizing the autopilot, finding a way to step back and observe, and then begin to develop, let's say, a new prototype of a behavior I would be much more comfortable and happy with, which I then begin to implement. Now that's challenging because we leave the familiar and try something new, and we will never quite know how it goes until we try.